Sri Lanka's parliamentary speaker has accepted the resignation of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Sri Lankans have been celebrating after their embattled president stepped down. For months, they have been demanding the removal of Rajapaksa, who they blame for the country's severe economic crisis. He finally tendered his resignation after fleeing to Singapore.
On the streets of Sri Lanka, people celebrate after hearing the country's president has resigned. They say this is a triumph for democracy.
This is a huge victory. We struggled here more than 3 months, and I would like to say, it's this. At this moment, I feel this is a good lesson for all corrupted politicians in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, it's extremely happy for us because we were able to kick out our president, who is the most powerful person in the country. We show the people powers. It's an extremely happy day for us.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled Sri Lanka to the Maldives, ending up in Singapore before emailing his official resignation. Sri Lanka has seen months of anti-government protests, with people storming government buildings and taking over heavily guarded compounds. Many are frustrated with the worsening political and economic crisis that's caused food and fuel shortages. A day earlier, protesters entered the Prime Minister's office, the man who they worry will take over the country. Some occupied the sitting areas, and others took selfies. The army has been brought in to restore law and order after Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, now the acting president, called for a state of emergency. Demonstrators have agreed to vacate the occupied buildings, but many say they still don't have confidence in their leaders.
We have to continue our struggle for the future.
While the president's resignation is a start, the protesters say they want a complete overhaul of Sri Lanka's leadership. They vow to continue to take to the streets until they believe there is real change.
And DW's Manira Chowdhury is in Colombo for us. So as we've heard there, the Speaker of the Parliament has accepted the president's resignation. What happens now?
Well, yes, this morning, the Speaker of the Parliament held a press conference where he announced that Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation has now finally been accepted. And he has also announced, now if you talk about the next step is definitely the future course of action, a plan that the Parliament has to come with to stabilize the politics of the country. And for the same, the Speaker did announce this morning that the Parliament will convene tomorrow. And he has requested all the MPs, all the members of the Parliament to come and attend it, to be present, because the future course of action is dependent upon that. So we can expect some important, crucial calls to be taken once this Parliament is convened.
We're hearing that, meantime, though, on the streets, that a relative calm has set in. Is that what you are also observing?
Well, yes, the situation is relatively calmer right now. I'm at the moment standing at the old Parliament building, which is right now the Presidential Secretariat. Behind me, you can see a lot of people sitting calmly on the staircase. This entire area has been the epicenter since the beginning of the protests against Gotabaya Rajapaksa. In fact, the people renamed it as Gota Gogama, basically a place to demand his resignation, his ouster, which has now been done. But the pulse of the ground is that the protests will not abate anytime soon. One major demand still remains, which is for Ranil Wickremesinghe to step down from the post of Prime Minister, to step down from the post of acting president. Now, we don't know whether that will happen. That remains to be seen. But we can expect protests to happen again.
Okay. Tell us, this latest move now, what does it mean economically for the country? Because Sri Lanka is essentially bankrupt, and the previous government was in talks with the IMF for a bailout.
Well, yes, but one thing is really important here to think about is that economic stability will not come before political stability does. That is why the all-party meeting of the government and the Parliament to convene is of utmost importance. In fact, the governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka even said that the country may face a huge problem, a possible shutdown, if a stable administration is not brought into position soon, because even the IMF cannot roll out a bailout package since that happens. So that is of utmost priority right now.
DW's Manira Chowdhury reporting from Colombo in Sri Lanka. Thank you so much.
So what does this all mean for Sri Lanka? I'm joined now to analyze the situation by Alan Keenan. He's from the International Crisis Group in London. Alan, it's good to see you again. It looks like the resignation will be confirmed probably by tomorrow, Friday. What do you think comes next for Sri Lanka?
Well, it's certainly taken a while. It was Gotabaya took us on a long, wild goose chase, but he seems to have landed in Singapore and seems to have agreed to resign. So that's good news, I think, for Sri Lanka, up to a point. What comes next? Well, that's a question. It looks like Ranil Wickremesinghe comes next. He is now the acting president. He will be sworn in a more official way tomorrow, and he will then have 30 days for his presidency to be either challenged or confirmed through a parliamentary vote. And I'm hearing different things, but it does seem like he is likely to be voted in by Parliament probably sometime next week. And importantly, with the support of the Rajapaksa's political vehicle, the SLPP party. And that raises big questions about how much Ranil will really be seen to be a change from the Rajapaksas by the protest movement, and whether he can really prove that he's something different and not just the agent of the Rajapaksas.
Well, and that also brings us to the question, Alan, is he going to get these 30 days to do anything? Are the protesters going to turn the volume down and let him stay in office for any amount of time?
Yes. Well, I think my hunch is there will be a bit of a wane in the energies of the protest movement. They're probably exhausted. I mean, it's exhausting to be in Sri Lanka when you have no fuel and not enough food and high prices, but then to be spending all your time in the street demonstrating and fighting with the cops and everything and taking over buildings. I think they're probably going to take a little bit of a break. But I do think there's real potential here for tension further down the line, because he's already, I mean, the demands the last few months have been not just for Gotabaya to resign, but for Ranil to resign, and for Ranil to go from being prime minister to actually being elevated to president. From the protesters' point of view, that's not good. And more generally, I think Ranil Wickremesinghe is the quintessential professional politician in Sri Lanka, and one of the targets of the protests is not just the Rajapaksa family, but the whole system. And Ranil Wickremesinghe is not only close to and has been protecting the interests of the Rajapaksas, but he is the essence of the system that people want to change. So I think there's potential trouble coming down the pike.
And we know the country is in an economic crisis, the likes of which they haven't seen in at least 2-3 generations. This is a time when the IMF would usually be opening its door, willing to talk about a possible bailout. Is an economic bailout, is it even within the realm of possibility when you have so much political instability?
Yes, well, I think on that front, my reading is, well, it all depends on how tense things become again. If the tension levels, if the protests can be sort of kept to a reasonable amount from the government's perspective, I think the IMF is eager to help, and something needs to happen. So I suspect the IMF deal will be formalized if Ranil is made the president, and assuming anybody really becomes president who has some credibility. But I think the IMF package is not going to come for quite a while. The actual money, even in the best case scenario, is estimated to take 6 months. And what's going to happen in those 6 months? They're completely bankrupt.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Time is certainly not on the country's side, that is for sure. Alan Keenan, as always, Alan, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
For some, the political and economic instability is already too much. Some refugees have started trickling into India from Sri Lanka. According to Save the Children, 2 out of 3 Sri Lankan families are struggling to find enough to eat. So those who can have started arriving by boat across the narrow strait that separates Sri Lanka and India, most landing on the island of Rameshwaram. It's not far, about 20 kilometers, but it's the open ocean and the crossings can be risky. So far, the newcomers are mostly Tamils, the ethnic minority group that fought a devastating civil war in Sri Lanka for decades. They've come to India's Tamil Nadu state, a region that shares deep cultural and linguistic ties. DW Asia's Kritika Narayanan is in Rameshwaram in the southern state of Tamil Nadu. Kritika, what's the latest? What are you seeing and hearing down there?
I am standing in Rameshwaram. This is a coastal town. This is the southernmost town of India. This is the southernmost tip. So this is very near to Sri Lanka, actually. So this is where for the past few months, due to the economic crisis in Sri Lanka, many Sri Lankan refugees are coming here illegally through boats. It takes about 3 hours for them to cross over here, and they mostly travel by night. And as of now, nearly 100 refugees have come to this coastline. They come to Dhanushkodi and Arichal Munai. These are the points where they come and land, and they are being taken by enforcement officials to the refugee camp in Mandapam, where they're being held now. And they have been coming for the past few months steadily. Yes.
Well, I'm looking at the sea behind you. It looks pretty calm right now, but you mentioned night journeys. How dangerous is this, boat trip, and do you expect to see more arrivals?
It is very dangerous, actually. And in the last week of June, an elderly couple tried to cross over. They're very old, and they tried to cross over. And one of the elderly women, she died due to dehydration when she landed on. She was unconscious when she landed on the shore, and she was taken immediately to the hospital where she died. Treatment plans stayed for her. So it is dangerous for them, but they do take the risk to come here. They sell their land, they sell their homes, they use that money, everything that they have, to rent those boats, and they come here. They are so this is not the first time refugees have been coming to Tamil Nadu. So Tamil Nadu, before in Sri Lanka during the civil war, a huge waves of refugees did come here, because Tamil Nadu, it's more culturally and linguistically related to them. They speak the same language. They feel like this is their home, so they do keep coming. Even though it is not a huge number, it's not a huge wave as it was during the civil war, it is a significant number. It's nearly 100, and they have been steadily coming. Families have been coming with children, little children, carrying their children in their arms, elderly people. Like, mostly these people are coming from northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka. This is where Sri Lankan Tamils reside the most. So these Sri Lankan Tamils are the people who are coming here as refugees. And as this is not a huge wave, this is not a crisis as of now. But if the economic crisis in Sri Lanka gets worse, there is a chance that more people could come here soon.
Now, you mentioned local officials being involved. How are they managing the situation? I mean, it looks like in the past this has been a route for refugees. Are they treating the refugees well?
India is not party to refugee conventions, so they are treating these refugee cases on a humanitarian basis. They are not party to any law. India does not also have any domestic refugee laws to handle these refugees. So these refugees are currently housed in Mandapam. It's a refugee camp there. They are housed along with Sri Lankan civil war refugees. So they are placed there. And yes, they are currently there right now. They are not allowed to come out of there. And because there is uncertainty, because India is not party to any international refugee laws, nor there is a regional domestic refugee law for them. And it's unclear as to how they'll proceed from there in the future. Will they be repatriating them back to Sri Lanka? That remains to be seen.
Kritika Narayanan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.